Hello. How is everybody doing this Wednesday evening? I am doing pretty good. Let's see. I've got Thursday's video filmed, and I'm pretty happy with it. Tomorrow's weather video is on dry adiabatic lapse rate. That's going to be very exciting. Last past Monday was a super fun Guns, Magic, and Seal. If you guys don't know, I DM a game for a bunch of my internet science friends over on Cheshire Vic's channel every other Monday. If you want to see me get real nervous and upset in the DM's chair, this last episode is the one for you, because, spoilers, my joke health potion almost killed someone, and I felt real bad about it. Yeah. But tonight we are going to be continuing to react to Answers and Genesises. It's probably too many S's, but it's fine. Their climate change seminar they did back in 2019. So this is a part 2. We did this for about an hour and a half last week. I think we got through about 20 minutes of the seminar. That's not the button I wanted. I wanted this button. Here we go. So let's see. Just to recap, this is from Dr. Alan White. Is that who this is? Yeah, Dr. Alan White, who has a PhD in chemistry. And there's nothing wrong with having a PhD in chemistry. Some of my best friends are PhD chemists. But just having a PhD in chemistry, and he mostly seemed to work in industry, which is great and a super important job. I just want to point out that does not inherently make him an expert in climate change, right? So far he's talked. Well, okay, he started off this seminar by introducing the differences between weather and climate, and I was all like, oh, huzzah, he knows the differences between them. But then went on to completely confuse the two, and started talking about different worldviews, and that's sort of the section that we're in. Also, team, let me know. So the IPCC report just came out. The new one. So that's the UN's International Panel on Climate Change. And I definitely had a request in the comments to go through that report with you guys. So I think I'm going to put out a poll on my channel. I'll put a poll out on YouTube or maybe Twitter. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Probably here on YouTube, I'll put a poll out for if you guys want to see that as a live video where I'm not gonna I don't really prep for live videos, guys. I just show up and do my best. Or if you would like a proper scripted video going through the IPCC report, that kind of thing. So if you got opinions on that, let me know. Shoot them my way either on Twitter. Wow, Twitter or YouTube. Don't know what Twittis is. Twitter or YouTube in the comments, and I'll be looking for a poll in the next day or two. And I think that might be a very educational but fun thing to go through the IPCC report. The new one. Okay, cool. So that was enough probably of me rambling for a few minutes. And hello to everybody that is here. So hello, Strebecca and Icarus, you guys were here waiting beforehand. Hi, Caleb. Icarus, I definitely appreciate the ham and eggs theme from Pelagia. Yeah, that's a great series. I like to watch those. And hello, Robert and alias fake name. Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. Okay, so let's play this video. We left off, he was talking again about worldviews, and I was annoyed because what does that have to do with anything? Nothing. It has nothing to do with anything.
Okay, and then let's look at a scientist, a very famous scientist, Stephen Hawking.
I'm going to have to pause it immediately. Stephen Hawking is, of course, a very famous scientist. He's still not a climate scientist. He's a he's since passed away. He was a theoretical physicist and a cosmologist. And something that I do appreciate here is these brief quotes, right? He's certainly representing the consensus view of the climate community. But if you're going to do a seminar on climate change and the theme of this is like, we really shouldn't be super worried about it, that's like the theme of the AIG seminar, like, you really should be talking to climate scientists, you know? Like, Stephen Hawking's all well and good. And you know, the man was absolutely brilliant, but I would argue that I might know more about climate change than he does because I actively study it and he didn't, right? You know, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe his secret hobby was studying climate change. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Just like just because Stephen Hawking was completely brilliant in his field, it doesn't mean he's inherently an expert on all other science fields. But okay.
Theoretical physicist and cosmologist. And he said this back in 2006, the danger is global warming may become self-sustaining if it hasn't done so already.
So that's referring to like a runaway greenhouse effect. So if you go back and watch some of my climate dynamics videos, I go through some of these. It's check out the ones towards the end when I talk about climate feedback loops. So there are certain processes that, like, if you warm air temperature, like ice albedo effect, right? If you warm the air temperature some, then we're going to lose sea ice. The less sea ice we have, the lower Earth's albedo is, so the less sunlight we reflect back out to space. So the lower the albedo, the more sunlight we observe, the warmer we get, and that feeds into this positive feedback loop. And there are several such loops going on in the atmosphere. Most of them are positive. So this self-sustaining thing that Stephen Hawking is referencing is those like climate feedbacks. These are turns out there's going to reach a point where even if we cut all emissions, right, the Earth is going to keep warming because of these positive feedback loops. Okay.
We need to urgently reverse global warming if we still can. And so even the famous scientist is looking at this and say, maybe it's going to get out of control. I don't know. And then the political perspective, a very recent one, once you may have seen, the world is...
And, you know, like, again, we're not citing climate scientists here, and I think that's the biggest problem. I think there's a whole other stream we could have, a whole other conversation we could have about the rhetoric around climate change, how like I, as a scientist in this field, I sort of know better than to say things like the world is going to end in 12 years, because that's a very vague statement with a weirdly hard deadline, right? And like, and it's not something that we can actually say, right? Like, for example, I like to use sea ice. So sometime between now and the end of this century, we are going to have an ice-free summer. Like, there will be no sea ice up in the Arctic. It probably isn't going to happen this year, but other than that, like, or actually, yeah, no, it's not going to happen this year, but like, it could happen in the next 5 years, or it might take 50, right? Like, it's a little tricky. And so if I was advising Congresswoman Cortez here, or if I was advising AOC on like climate policy, and I'm not an expert in climate policy, right? But I like to say, like, a great way to communicate climate policy is to talk about clean water and clean air, right? Because the policies that would mitigate global climate change are the same policies that are going to like clean up local environments in ways that you can like tangibly see and understand their effect on your life for like a non-specialist or a non-scientist. And honestly, climate change, most people don't understand it because most people don't understand that difference between climate and weather. And actually, that like individual people don't really experience climate because climate is talking about like 30 plus year trends, right? So communicating climate change is incredibly difficult. And if I was going to be like advocating for policy, right, like climate policy, again, I would communicate it as what we want is clean water and clean air, right? Those are the things that we want. And things like, I forget my source on this. Honestly, I think I heard it in a seminar and this number just stuck with me. It's that I think in the United States, on average, just breathing the air as an American lowers your life expectancy by like 9 months, right? Wouldn't it be great if breathing didn't lower your life expectancy? Anywho, that's how I would communicate climate policy.
It's going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, very young, new representative, and stating her opinion on that and gaining a lot of attention. I suspect we're going to see a lot of her over the next few years. And then you'll see on.
Don't you kind of like, I don't know if he's trying to do this, but like, do you feel him intentionally not saying anything inflammatory, but like just hinting at it? Like just hinting at he doesn't like her, but not actually saying anything. I don't know. I find that a little infuriating, right? Like, I guess on the one hand, I'm like, don't say the quiet part out loud. But like, if I can tell you're thinking the quiet part, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm a pessimist. Who knows?
On the NASA website, you might be a little surprised, but they're very interested in this subject too.
Yeah, NASA's super interested in this. Satellites, like all of our Earth observing satellites, team NASA runs those. The entire NASA like space exploration budget is like justified in the billions of dollars they save taxpayers every year by helping us accurately forecast hurricanes. And okay, Robert, I'm glad I'm not the only one that hears that in his voice, right? This is like, I feel like if I came up and showed science to him, like I would get this like obnoxiously polite forced smile and then like have to leave the building. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one. But yeah, NASA is super involved in climate science because we have Earth observing satellites, which we need for weather and forecasting the weather and understanding our climate. Gosh, a couple people at my university, a couple professors just won some like big NASA grants to keep studying things. I know that most of when we think of NASA, we think of the space exploration side, but that's actually a relatively small portion of their budget. They do a lot here for us here on planet Earth.
And you can get a lot of good scientific data from them. And what do we see on the NASA website is that we're seeing higher carbon dioxide levels, and carbon dioxide is steadily rising. And it's 0.041% today and rising at about 0.002% a year. So is carbon dioxide at a high concentration? Well, no, but it is an important part of our atmosphere.
Okay, so the thing to be careful with here is like, okay, so here's the question of like, how much is CO2? Well, like CO2 makes up less than 1% of the atmosphere. Also, hi, Harmonica Man. It makes up less than 1% of the total parts of the atmosphere, right? So it's very small, but you don't need a whole lot to have a big effect. Easiest way to think about that is it doesn't take a whole lot of cyanide to kill a person, right? In Minecraft. So things can be toxic in small doses, right? So same thing with the atmosphere. Even though CO2 doesn't make up a whole lot of the atmosphere, it still is incredibly important because of the wavelengths of light that it interacts with. Specifically, it is transparent to UV radiation, so it just lets sunlight pass straight through it, but it is opaque to infrared. So the radiation that the Earth re-emits, it's trying to re-emit back to space. That's in the infrared range, and CO2 just loves to gobble that right up. It eats it all up and then re-emits it. And so that creates a heating loop. Okay. Okay, so, and I mean, I don't know if those are the exact right numbers. We're looking at CO2 doubling total over like 1 to 200 years. That's the normal type of experiment that we run. And so I'm not going to figure out off the top of my head what percent increase that is every year. But those are the types of numbers we're looking at.
About 1 in 2,500 molecules in our atmosphere is carbon dioxide. Okay, so 1 out of 2,500 molecules, if you're able to pick them out of the air, would be carbon dioxide. And then, is the sea level rising? Yes, it is, and the sea level's been rising for quite a while, at a fairly steady rate at about 1/8 of an inch per year. Okay, and so that's 1/8 of an inch. So every 8 years, it would be up roughly one eighth of, excuse me, one.
Okay, so like I'm certainly willing to accept this data he has from from NASA. Like I let's just assume this is all good. And the important number here, so one, he's assuming a linear relationship, right? That raising the sea levels rising by about 1/8 an inch a year that's a like constant rate and will remain constant. That's not super true. The biggest thing that you have to consider with sea level rise is the melt of land ice, right? So like what I study, sea ice, so frozen sea water, which is what you see that's, here we go, like Arctic sea ice minimum, right? That's not super concerning because that is water, sort of think of it, the oceans as a glass, right? The sea ice is the ice that's already in the glass. But when land ice, so when sea ice melts, it doesn't affect the overall ocean level, right? Because it's the water that's already in the glass. But land ice is really the concerning thing. So on planet Earth, we have two major ice sheets, the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet. And so that is a whole bunch of frozen fresh water that is on land. So when that water melts or breaks off and goes into the ocean, that is adding water to the ocean. So using our like cup analogy, that's pouring water into the cup, right? So if like Greenland's ice sheet broke in half and half of it slipped into the ocean, that would be super catastrophic and very bad. But that rate of sea level rise would be way high for that year. And so, by the way, that's this, see this land ice, Greenland land ice has gone down by 100 billion tons a year, right? So that's a number, like that's the number to be really concerned about, right? Because we could have what we could have is sea levels rise not at this steady rate, but it could happen sort of like catastrophically, right? So there's no reason to assume that that's going to be a linear increase and be constant at that rate, right? Yeah, absolutely. Warming ocean waters is also an issue. Yeah, that's, the ocean is going to store like so much heat. It's very good at that. Okay, here we go.
Inch. But then put into perspective, if you look in the history of what scientists believe, they believe that the sea level was actually 100 meters or around 300 feet lower than it is today. And so these seem like relatively minor changes.
Okay, but let's think about that, right? Because again, like I don't know if anyone has explained this, but planet Earth is going to be just fine with lots and lots of CO2. We humans may not be, right? That's the thing. So he is saying that, like, well, planet Earth has been fine under other conditions, right? Planet Earth was super happy back when it was a molten ball of lava, before, like, 4.5 billion years ago, right? Planet Earth was super happy to be in that state, and it's just as happy to be in this state. Planet Earth doesn't really care. I'm gonna Google really fast the what percent of Earth's population lives on the coast. Google says it's about 40%. 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. Okay, so that's the problem, right? That's the problem. We've got, yeah, Robert, exactly. Venus exists. Venus is perfectly happy being Venus. Anywho, so 40% of the Earth's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coastline. Think of, like, how expensive oceanfront property is. Think of the city of New York, right? With sea levels rising, that's going to, can you imagine displacing almost half of the Earth's population, and how catastrophic that would be for countries and infrastructure and like political, like, stability around the world, right? I mean, like, if sea levels were where they were, like, when he's talking about, I think all of Florida is gone, right? Where are we going to put the entire population of Florida? And that's just the one state I can think of off the top of my head, right? That's not even the whole planet. So, like the issue here is not, will Earth be okay? Earth is fine. We're not gonna be. That's the problem, right? So, but that's no. That's not what he's going to talk about.
And it will be given that perspective. And then finally, as we've already seen, the global temperature rising almost roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. And so you see a lot of that on the NASA website, and you can get some good information, but clearly on the side of a global warming enthusiast there at NASA. And then one final thing I forgot to mention earlier, our young people are actually also starting to pay attention. They've been taught now for.
Yeah. You know what? And here's the thing. Greta, whatever you think of her, right? Like, or whatever you think of her activism or whatever have you, like, she is a child and should not have to be an activist. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of what makes me a little upset. Is that like, and yeah, like, act as if your house is on fire because it is. Like, yeah, it is. And we have time to put it out, but not if we don't pick up a hose. You know what I mean? Like, she's not lying. People are just mad because she's, like, a child. Oh, and she's not, like, polite. She's mad. Turns out. That's a whole other rant. That's a whole, here, I'm going to big in my face for this. That's a whole other rant that I have about, like, women and girls not being allowed to be angry, right? If we express anger, then we're viewed as, like, unhinged, whereas that's, like, the only emotion that's acceptable for men to show. It's a very unhealthy thing. Anywho, okay, that's my rant. That's the wrong button. I wanted this button. There we go. Yeah. Okay.
For a long time that we are the cause of the temperature rising.
We are the cause of the rate at which temperature is rising is 100% human induced.
And some of them are paying attention and thinking that they really should pay attention to this issue. And Greta Thunberg, she may be the face of global warming here in the future. She's a 16-year-old.
Okay, so a child, so you don't necessarily need to talk about her.
From Sweden. And she got so worried about this and her life, and it really had her panicked. And she decided to stop going to school and to start protesting in front of the Swedish government every day. And she did that, and she finally got a following, and people are recognizing her on the internet. And you may even see it coming into the United States. I don't know yet, but students are now taking some Fridays off in Europe and in Canada and protesting for climate, that we need to do more on climate change.
Like, so Kayla's making a point that, like, yeah, 5-year-old neighbor started going on a climate rant, right? And that's like, so if the conversation is like I don't think a 5-year-old needs to be upset about climate change. You know what I mean? I think the appropriate conversation for that age is like, hey, we need to be responsible with resources. So let's turn the water off when we're brushing our teeth. Let's compost. Let's get food directly from a farm, right? Those are like the behaviors to model there, I think. And I think that's like the age appropriate conversation. Because like we're not all gonna, like, all humans on Earth are not gonna be dead 5 years from now, right? That's like not real. But like, so I think it's an important thing to talk about. And again, like, we have time to do stuff about it. We just have to like take action. And so that's like, I don't live my life in panic, but that's also sort of like, I try to be a responsible human. I try to educate people on climate stuff. You know what I mean? And like, yeah, and I would love to have a conversation with my like senator about climate change and educate him a bit. But my senator is Imhoff. He's the one that brought the snowball to the Senate floor. So that's great. That's super great. Anywho, yeah, okay. But like I'm not saying don't worry in the sense of like don't take action, right? Um, I'm saying like we can take action and not, like, we can take action calmly. I guess that's me though. That's sort of my personality. Um, anywho, anywho.
But I do admire Greta Thunberg, though. She is doing what many are not. She's actually changing her lifestyle based on what she says she believes. All right? And so to me, she's got my respect. I don't believe we have a climate crisis like she believes we do, but I admire what she's doing. They invited her to the economic forum in Davos.
So, Rebecca, my senator at least has like, there's one day a year that's supposed to be like the day when scientists from any field can come talk to him. I've heard rumors of climate scientists getting thrown out of his office. And I hope that's real. Well, the part of me that like is a DM, like, and likes Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy hopes that's real, right? The part of me that's like, oh right, I live in the real world is really upset by that. And one of the Oklahoma senators, if you can get yourself to DC, he has a weekly like coffee hour for his constituents. So in theory, that's a thing you could do. Okay. Okay.
Switzerland. And so she accepted, but she wouldn't fly. She thought she doesn't fly anymore. And so she took a 32-hour train ride to Davos. And then she wouldn't go in the hotel room they'd reserved for her. She camped out instead, out in 0-degree weather, and then told them things like this: I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And active as if your house is on fire, because it is. And so she's taking it very seriously and very concerned, as some of you may be. And so, but that's Greta's perspective on the issue. Now I want to look.
And notice that of the 3 people he cited, right, it was people who in the young earth creationism crowd are pretty inflammatory, right? He chose to talk about Stephen Hawking's, AOC, and Greta Thunberg. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. None of whom are climate scientists. Only, and Greta is the only one in there who's like, she's a climate activist, which is like a, close, but again, also a literal child, right? So, and I'm not saying that like children can't make a difference. I'm just saying that's like she's a literal child. I strive to live in a world where no child has to be an activist. That's like my life goal. And I don't want to dismiss what she's saying because she is a child, right? That's just all like I don't know. I think we should treat children in public spheres differently than we treat adults in public spheres, right? Um, Anywho, okay. But yeah, so the 3 people he chooses to represent as, I don't know, are these supposed to be climate experts, right? None of whom are climate scientists. So if the goal here is to talk about like the science, we've yet to get to it, and we've yet to mention a single climate scientist. Um, like, so to me, that's a problem. If your goal is to educate folks on climate change, even to educate people on your I mean, like, again, he's not a climate scientist himself, so I don't think he should be speaking from a non-consensus position. But if he is going to present a non-consensus position as a non-expert in the field, then by golly, do we need to have the expert research? Do we need to have the experts represented? And he's just not doing that, right? So this to me, just it's not, and he hasn't. We're 23 minutes in. And Robert, I understand the goal isn't to talk about the science, but like it should be, right? It really should be. That should be the purpose of this. I know that his purpose is like propaganda, and to reinforce already held beliefs. But still, like, I hold him to a higher standard than I do most of the ham and eggs crowd, because he is a professional scientist. He has a PhD in chemistry from Harvard, for crying out loud. Like, he knows better. I just threw my pencil over my shoulder, the pencil that I was fidgeting with. Anyhow, he knows better. So let's listen to him talk a little bit more.
I want to change gears now. That was a secular perspective, and I want to look at a biblical perspective for a minute. And what do we know from the Bible? That God created everything in 6 days of ordinary length, and not that long ago, based on the genealogies or the family trees in the Bible. And so, excuse me, it's a very different perspective than we see from the other. So is the earth designed now? From a biblical perspective, we'd certainly say that it is, not that it came about by random forces. As a matter of fact, these two perspectives can't hardly be any more different.
I know everybody watching this knows that everything he just said is nonsense, right? I'm just going to point it out. Is nonsense. And if you want to make that claim, I need you to either provide me with like scientific evidence to support that claim, like real scientific evidence, or just say that like, or go ahead and upfront admit that you need a miracle, right? And then if it was set up by like miraculous, if the earth was created miraculously, and it doesn't matter what scientific evidence says, right? Because magic, then okay, but you can't then demand that the field that we use to like predict the weather and forecast other things and looking towards the future, right? That methodology is no different than what we use to do other fields of science, right? The same things that like let us build cars and rockets and understand the orbits of comets. You know, you can't then say, oh, but your field of study isn't valid because miracles, right? Like the how the Earth began has nothing to do actually with like climate, with what the data about climate change is telling us. And Simos, how are forces random? That's actually like random forcing is a very common science term. It is, so it's not random in the sense that like, yes, we can mathematically understand how all of these forces work and they follow fundamental laws. But like the random forces would be an acceptable shorthand to describe like the Earth coming together under gravity, because it's a mixture of like Brownian motion and van der Waals forces, and then we get to gravity eventually. So it's formed from different things. Okay, let's let him talk a little bit more.
Than they are here. One says a very long period of time, random processes brought us here. The Bible says no, a very short period of time, not that long ago, and it was caused by the God of the Bible, a supernatural process.
Okay, there we go. We're going
is
back
it time
to miracles.
panic about global warming from a biblical perspective? And I'd say no. Matter of fact, if from a biblical perspective, it's not time to panic about anything.
Okay, then don't panic, but is it time to take action and do things to like preserve the health of our communities and fight against pollution and be conscious of like where we get our food from? That's not panic. That's just like being a good steward, right? That's being responsible with our resources. Okay. Okay.
God is in control. And the other thing, and I'll try to show you, climatology, as we're going to look at the data, is a young science, and there's much that we don't understand yet. And so even just from a scientific perspective, it's hard for me to understand why we would want to panic at this point.
Okay, again, then don't panic. Then like you don't have to be in a panic to be responsible, right? Like, and that's literally all anyone is asking you to do. Just be basic responsible. All right.
And so what does the Bible say? In Genesis 1:28, it said, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves.
Yeah, be responsible for the earth, right? You have consciousness, other animals don't. So you know, you have to make smart choices.
Who's on the earth. And so what's God done? He's actually given us some responsibility along with him to take care of the earth. And that's a responsibility that we should take seriously. And if we find that we are harming the environment, we should be willing to change.
Okay. Okay, Dr. White, that's one point in your column. Yeah. Should be willing to change if we find that we are causing harm. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. That is factual. I have a sneaking suspicion he's going to conclude that humans aren't causing harm, which is false. But, okay. Okay, so Don, I could be wrong on this, but I'm thinking about like, oh gosh. I have to think about that. What on average, I'm Googling this, on average, how far does food travel? Okay. Yeah, so meals in the United States travel about 1,500 miles to get from farm to plate. And that's consumes a large amount of fossil fuels. So that's what I was thinking of specifically. But you're certainly right that like over fertilizing and then like watering places, like bringing irrigation to places that are typically dry is like using up water resources. So there's a lot of concerns there. But if we're thinking just about emissions, then I was thinking more about emissions than I was like water use and other things like that. Okay. Anywho.
Based on this biblical perspective. And certainly what else should we just use up our resources when we don't even need them? Of course not. We need to be good stewards of the resources that God has provided for us.
Okay. I like this part. Preach this, brother.
And so even that, I think we can agree on with the folks with a secular perspective, that they believe we ought to use resources wisely also. Okay, and so from a biblical perspective, again, the 7 C's of history, I don't know whether you've seen this before or not. It's a good way of remembering the history of the Bible, starting with creation. God made everything very good, world and death.
Cool.
Opportunity, if you have, glad you do. The creation and the catastrophe, as we're going to see, are the 2 C's of history that are actually going to play into this issue of climate change the most. And I'll show you how that's going to go here in a minute. Okay. One more thing. As I said before, God made this planet to be inhabited. Isaiah 45, 18 says, He did not create it empty. He formed it to be created.
Cool.
And did He do that and then go on vacation? No. Colossians 1:16 says, For by Him all things were created. And at the bottom we see, and in Him all things hold together.
Okay, so actually this is referring to I'm gonna step into like theology for a second. But this is so on the 7th day God rests, right? In the biblical creation story. On the 7th day of creation, God rests. And my favorite way to view that, I think it's more of like a Jewish perspective. I am not a theologian. This is just a cool thing. And is this a sermon or a lecture? It's an AIG presentation. So yes. So is the idea that on the 7th day God rests, like not because God is tired, but because He has created humans to be these stewards of the earth, right? So part of the creation story is that like before God began to create, the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the chaos, right? So there was this guardian that took chaos and brought order, and that is what creation is. And then once man has been made, then like God rests because now man made in the image of God, and man I mean in a gender neutral term. So humans are made and their responsibility is again to be a good steward of the earth. So that's what we're talking about here. And so anyhow, I forget my point with that. But it's the idea is that like we are living in the 7th day. We're living in this responsibility to creation. It is the responsibility of all humans to like leave the earth better than you found it. Anyhow, okay, I'll stop talking. Let's talk about climate change.
And so that's a biblical perspective. And finally, I want you to remember this one as much as any other scripture that relates to this subject. Genesis 8:22, while the earth remains.
Okay, cool. We're not saying that like day and night, summer and winter, like, oh my gosh, if you want to rely on a miracle, like that's not, I don't even know how to, I'm sorry, this is like kind of breaking my brain. Like, because what he's saying is we should be good stewards, yes, but we can't actually do anything wrong because then God will just fix it with a miracle. Genesis says so. Anyhow. John, I like that one. Listen, God would be a lot more relatable if he'd pulled an all-nighter, right? Okay.
Seed time and harvest.
Okay, that's
not
fine. I don't think this
cease.
can be reached up
Given
there.
us a promise that while the earth remains, all these things, and if all these things remain, cold, harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, if we can grow food, then that's going to be a reasonable environment in which for us to live. And so that's a promise that God's made to us. And I think it's a very important one to remember when we're looking at this issue. So the summary, real quickly, is the biblical perspective.
Okay. Oh, good. Yep. Great. God is okay. How is this last point different? God has shared with us the responsibility for taking care of the earth versus the opposite perspective is supposed to be it is up to people to understand it and to fix it. Uh, uh, cool, right? Like, how are those two statements different? Right, fundamentally, how are they different? Right. Um, Now the statement in here, obviously, like the like obviously the YEC stuff right here is not good and incorrect. But in terms of climate change, like this is the concerning phrase. I hope you guys can see my mouse. But God has promised to keep the earth suitable for life until the consummation. I'm guessing that's like the end times. Um, so does that mean that we can do anything we want? Right? Clearly not. Like that clearly doesn't make any sense if you think about it for more than a second. Um uh and like okay, Flint, Michigan that has lead in the water, or places here in Oklahoma where you can light your tap water on fire from natural gas extract, right? Um, and Robert, yeah, absolutely. Those points 2 and 3 they're contradictory. Both of those things can't be true. Because if God has promised that he's just going to fix everything, then we're not actually responsible for everything. So that statement about God sharing with us the responsibility by taking care of the earth, like that doesn't hold with the second point. Um, so and again, like, okay, great. But then what about like if all this stuff is true, but then like what about the Dust Bowl? Right? The Dust Bowl and that like famine is a great example of how humans directly negatively impacted the climate of a region and made it like impossible to grow food, and people starved and livestock starved, and there was like massive famine and huge numbers of refugees leaving like the Great Plains en masse, and that's like within living memory, and that's because of, by the way, great book to read is The Worst Hard Time. It's all about the Dust Bowl. And anyway, it's a really great read, and it's an easy read too. Like it's not super dense. And it's a great example in living memory of how humans can directly affect their environment and make it not livable. Anyway, so just like all those points, they're not self-consistent on the biblical perspective side there. So they're not self-consistent, and they're again demonstrably false. Okay.
God created the earth a few thousand years ago to do what? And a new earth. We need to be diligent and take that responsibility. Billions of years, not any point. You can see these two diametrically opposed perspectives on climate. So now let's look at the data a little more and look at the scientific data very quickly and show you a few things about that. But first, I had to put you up a polar bear again. That's just a requirement if you do a global warming talk.
Okay, that is true. I try to sneak into all of my presentations for school. I try to sneak in a sad polar bear and a Futurama reference. It's my goal. Okay.
You have to have a polar bear. But I put this one up for a purpose this time. I want you to think about that. Why is that polar bear up there on that piece of ice?
Dude, polar bears are literally starving. Like, okay.
What's he doing? Okay, what's he doing? Is he hanging on to that last piece of ice there is in the Arctic? Or is he trying to get a better perspective and see who's taking his picture? Okay. Now, I wonder, but I suspect it's probably the latter. Polar bears, of course, can swim many miles, but and so again,
And also are starving.
your perspective on things matters, and that's what I want you to remember as we go along. Of course, if the climate does continue to warm, some of the habitats for the polar bears may go away, and they may have to go back to land at some point.
Where they're starving.
Okay. Um, and so let's look at, before we look at the data though, what I want you to understand is that accurate temperature measurements of the all over the globe is not easy. Let's think about that for a minute. And how would we do that? How would you determine an average global temperature? Well, you'd have to have reporting stations all over the earth.
So the way you do it is we do have reporting stations all over the earth. That's a fun one. So we take those, and then you can weight them by a few different things. One, you usually weight them by their latitude, or you take like an average in a temperature range, like, hey, let's just get the average over the tropics, something like that. But another thing you would do, like, let's say I have 5, like, and yes, Rebecca, absolutely. Satellites take global measurements. It is like it's an indirect measurement, but it's really well calibrated. So so if you're taking different land measurements, what you can do is, like, let's say I have 5 over here and 1 over here. I won't weight these the same because these are all sort of measuring the temperature at the same location versus this guy. So this one measurement may be weighted more than these 5 over here because this is maybe the one measurement from this location, stuff like that. So yeah, so temperature measurements from satellites are calibrated with land observations. Yep. Uh-huh. Okay. So that's how we do it. Oh, we also have a ton of buoys now floating in the ocean. They're always taking like temperature data. That one's really cool. So that gets us more, because usually satellites get you like 2 passes a day ish. You might measure the same spot twice a day. It kind of depends on if it's a polar orbiting or geostationary satellite. Some satellites are better at measuring the tropics. Some are designed to get the poles, stuff like that. Yep. And Boomer, you absolutely. We also have like a global network of weather balloons that are launched twice a day, every day. And airplanes. Anybody that'll take temperature measurements, right? Like someone will bring that into a database. Because it's true, it is really difficult. There's actually a whole citizen scientist program through NOAA and then Weather Service where you can like set up a little weather station at your house and register it and like report data to the National Weather Service, and it is incorporated into forecasts and long-term data sets and stuff. Yeah. So let's see what he has to say about that.
And they'd have to be giving you a temperature measurement at one time because half the earth is going to be in day and half the earth is going to be at night.
So, dude, we take measurements based off of UTC, or that's like Greenwich Mean Standard Time, right? We do everything. We just call that UTC time, also, or Zulu, whatever. So we take them at 0 and 12Z, and that's what every weather station across the globe has agreed to do. And again, every weather station, whether you are in the United States or Germany or Russia or Australia, we all use UTC time so that we can clock our measurements. There is a huge international scientific community, and we have a really, really open sharing of data policy. Oh yeah, like I just as a grad student have access to a supercomputer whenever I want. because it takes so much computing power to do anything that's the size of the Earth, and everything we do is global. Anyhow. Okay. Ooh.
Some storms are going to be going on in some places, some wind, a lot of things that would affect the weather. And so cloudy, clear is going to affect things. And so it's not an easy thing to do. And so we're going to.
No, but we do it, and do it very well. Jeez.
Look at different ways that that climatologists have tried to measure how temperatures are, what the.
Oh, by the way, Icarus, okay, the thing that I hate most in the entire world are leap years. So, because I work with data sets, like I've been doing like daily sea ice data for 30, 40 years, and not every year is 365 days, and I hate it. I hate leap years so much. They make my life so. I just have like a data set. I gave up and I made a little script that's like, is this year, does February 29th exist on this year or not? And if it does, honestly, I usually end up averaging the 28th and the 29th together just to make my data set happier. Okay.
Average temperature of the Earth is. And what I want to show you here is just, these are the satellite data that I was telling you about. This is the best way that scientists have found so far to measure the average temperature on the Earth. And they have satellites, and they can look at a lot of different places on the Earth at the same time. And this is, but we remember.
Okay, be careful. We can look at the temperature a lot of different places on the Earth at the same time. Like, no, my dude, that's not how satellites work, right? Like, and yeah, notice this only goes back to 1979. So satellites are super, super, super useful primarily because satellites give us data where humans aren't. That is where satellites are the most useful, because it gives us global coverage. But satellites are most useful for big picture things. Yeah, that's. But it's like not more accurate than a thermometer. I don't know.
A climate is 30 years at minimum, right? And how much data do we have?
From satellites, we have other temperature data sets going back well into the 1800s, and that's from observations. We have observation-based data sets.
We've got a whole 40 years worth of data, and so it's not enough really to make.
No, my guy, like okay, what he just said was the only reliable temperature data is satellite data, and satellite data only goes back to 1979. So the problem there is that we have a data set of observations that goes back much further. It is less complete in its global coverage, but like that's okay. We know, like, there's a science to interpolating data, and we already have to do this. Sometimes satellites go out, right? What if your satellite stops recording data for the day? Do you have to throw out the whole year? No, of course not, right? We kind of average it out between the day before and the day after. Like, data interpolation is a thing that you inevitably have to do because there's no such thing as a perfect data set. Absolutely, satellites are great for seeing different greenhouse gases, because you get like because basically what that works is let's imagine a satellite as a passive receptor, right? So it's just going to receive different wavelengths of light, and we'll assume that it's a passive receiver that's able to receive multiple wavelengths, right? And so like we know the precise wavelengths at which CO2 emits, at which methane emits, at which sulfur dioxide emits. So you can measure how much of that is being emitted and relate that to the concentration. So that's a very cool satellite measurement. Yeah. So this is like either he really is, his like lack of knowledge of climate science is really, really, really showing here. Um, or he's being intentionally dishonest, right? And intentionally misrepresenting this. So like what it is a true statement that climate is looking at a minimum of 30-year averages. And it is a true statement that satellite data only goes back to 1979. It is not a true statement that that's our whole climate record. That's it. That's all we've got. Absolutely not true. We have so much more data than that. My God. Okay.
Make accurate models yet. But what do we see about the temperature? Overall, again, is the temperature slightly rising? Well, kind of overall in those 40 years it's about 1 degree Fahrenheit, or maybe a little more. But
that's terrifying. That temperature can raise by a full degree on average globally in less than one human's lifetime is terrifying, right? That like we said last time, like the ice age was on average 4 or 5 degrees colder, and that took thousands of years for that change, right? Hundreds to thousands of years. The fact that, that's a whole degree into 40 years is terrifying. Okay. Okay. Okay.
what do you also see? You see a lot of variation within the years, right? So a lot of bouncing around.
Yep, absolutely. There's a ton of interannual variation, but we could draw a linear trend right through that and show about a degree increase. Strebecca, they think there was exactly one ice age that somehow happened after the flood and lasted for a little bit of time. I don't fully get their perspective on it because it's nonsense, right? So like it's legitimately so bad I don't understand it. Okay. And Robert, you're absolutely right. If you guys are like tired of listening to me talk, just like read that comment section on the playback as it's scrolling through. It's a little scary. Okay.
Temperature. And you see the Mount Pinatubo, that was a volcanic eruption, and that put a lot of dust in the air and reflected some of the sun's heat away from us. And so,
yep, that's what volcanoes do. They can put a bunch of mostly sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that reflects sunlight back. But then, so we had a sudden drop in temperature, right? That's a pretty sharp drop here. But look, then it got warm again real fast because the residence time for sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere is like a few years. So if you're not continuously pumping it into the atmosphere, it does go away. CO2 has an average residence time of, I forget, it's somewhere between 3 and 5 years. I forget the exact number. So if we stopped pumping all CO2 into the atmosphere, stopped all man-made emissions, right? Like we would go back down to pre-industrial revolution levels, eventually, right? Like within my lifetime. But we're not going to do that. So, okay. The problem is we're continuously pumping CO2 and carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. This is not hard to understand. I'm sorry, I'm getting really frustrated, but like, yeah. The basics are not hard to understand.
So the temperature went down a little bit. El Nino, the currents in the oceans in the Pacific actually changed the temperature in a short term there. And so events on the Earth can also change that average global temperature. And so this is the best data we have, but we only have 40 years. So what are we going to have to do?
We have more than 40 years if we use multiple data sets, my guy.
To go back and look at more data that we're less sure about. And I showed you this earlier. This is the data.
So it's not that we're less sure, right? We have less global coverage. right? So like the data that we have that are temperature observations, we can be very sure that in Houston, Texas, on that day in 1897, it was the temperature that was recorded, right? It's like if we have one data point in Houston and one data point in Galveston, then what was the temperature in between, right? The uncertainty is in the data gaps, not in the measurements themselves. And I feel like he's not representing that correctly.
Now, these are measured on the Earth, but what happens on the Earth, a lot of times, the surroundings around these temperature devices change. More people come, and so
what does that have to do? What does that have to do with anything? Like, please explain to me how population of humans affects the function of a thermometer. Like, how does that work?
it changes that, and they have to correct. And so these are.
We have to correct for what? What? What does that mean? Good sir, what does that mean? Oh my God.
Corrected
okay.
to some degree, but these are the best data we have on the Earth. And before 1880, it's even less sure, and I'll show you a little bit about that. But do you remember back when I told you about global cooling? They were panicked about global cooling. Well, let's look on the graph here. It was about 1980, and what had the temperature been doing for several years before 1980? It had been going down a little bit, right? And so what did the scientists do? They said, well, the temperature's been going back down, and we're going to have a short-term focus, and we're going to be afraid. Well, we're afraid it's going to go.
Okay, so let's think about that line he just drew, which I'm going to assume he used the line function in PowerPoint, because if we were to do a linear fit to temperature data from say 1940 to 1960, and actually calculate that mathematically, that's going to have a shallower slope than that. Two, again, they looked at the data and were like, this is concerning. Could this be man-made? Blah, blah, blah. Maybe let's try to understand it better. Also, pollution's probably bad. Could these things be related? Meh. And then look at how rapid the temperature increase is starting in 1960. Look at that slope compared to everything else. So I don't, and so again, that global cooling concern that I think was actually in the 70s was presented by geologists. I'm pretty sure. And David, on the Gulf Stream being in danger of collapsing, I would have to read on that. Because my research is in the Arctic, I don't read a lot of papers on ocean currents in the tropics and mid latitudes. So that's not going to naturally fall into my sphere. But I could look into that if you are interested. If you want me to look into that and chat about it, I need you to send me an email because I will immediately forget this conversation. Sorry. Okay. But again, what he seems to be upset by is we saw that there was a problem, so then we learned more about it, and turns out it wasn't what we had initially thought. It was something else. And so science updated itself. I don't. Why is that? Please explain to me why that is bad.
Yeah. Go down and continue to go down. Okay. And so the short-term focus, again, even though the overall trend was up, some people looked at that and said, oh.
Okay, but this graph wasn't available to scientists in, say, 1940, right? Because nobody, it took a lot of work of climate scientists and our understanding of weather forecasting, right? The field of meteorology has advanced so much in the last 30, 40 years. Somebody bothered to create global databases of temperature. A human being had to sit down and do that to get this data so that we could look at it, right? And you're acting oh my gosh, you're acting like like one that's dismissing all of the work, right? It's just being so dismissive of all of the work that goes into even making a graph like this, right? Um, and how much like international cooperation is required and working between different agencies, understanding the weather and climate as a global system instead of a local one, right? Um, like when we do like progress in weather forecasts is in like we're looking at global atmosphere models now, not just like we're not just concerned with say like the state of Oklahoma, right? Because we understand that like what's going on in Oklahoma now is related to what was going on over the Pacific 4 days ago. And we have computer models that do this. We have massive projects to create reanalysis data sets. Reanalysis data sets go across the world, across the globe, get every country's, every organization's, all of their weather data and compiles it all together into one happy model and like addresses where there's like conflicts, you know? Oh my gosh, it's so much work. It's so much data. Um, it's not, I don't know, like chemistry, I feel like I don't know, I don't know chemistry, I'm not a chemist, you know, but part of me has the view of chemists of like I'm going to go to my lab and do an experiment and like get that results and then do it and then publish it, right? Like weather cannot be done by one person alone. Right? It takes a global community for us to do anything. And like he's so dismissive of that, and it that makes me so mad because this is my field.
Maybe it's going to continue to go down. And what are people doing today? Well, they're looking today and it's continuing to rise, right? And so they're going to say, well, maybe it's going to continue to.
Let's be, and also I reject of how he drew that blue line, because if we were to draw a single linear relationship between temperature, like the total temperature change between 1880 and 2000, that would be a linearly increasing with the change in slope, a significant change in slope following after 1980, right? Like that's not even a good linear fit, my guy. Surely a chemist, surely a chemist knows how to do a linear regression. That is like a high school student, a high school math student can do a linear regression.
Rise for a long time. But again, can we predict the future? It's not.
Yeah, we can. It depends on what question you ask.
We can't. And so I want you to just understand
Did you
that
just say
the
we can't?
future, it's not, we can't. And so,
Wait, I'm sorry.
but again, so they're going to say, well, maybe it's going to continue to rise for a long time. But again, can we predict the future? It's not, we can't. And so
we can,
I want you to
sir.
just understand that extrapolation beyond the data that you have is dangerous. And you can easily be wrong. And as a scientist, I've done this and I've been wrong when I did that. And so, well, what are we going to do? We really need a longer term perspective than this to get a good model of the climate. So what do we have to do? To go beyond that, we have to go to data that just correlates with temperature, because we didn't make temperature measurements before 1880. And so what do we see here? If we look, I think I mentioned the little ice age in the around 1600, something like that, maybe 14 to 1600.
I think he has published chemistry papers. But like in, I don't know exactly what his field in chemistry is. Okay. Anywho, I would need to see where he got this data from. And yeah, I'm a little that like. Look, we can draw a sine wave on top of this. Is it a natural climate cycle? This is over what, a couple thousand years? But notice these are all temperature anomalies. And so I don't know what they're relative to. So hold on. This is Roy Spencer website. Rise of natural climate cycle deniers. So one, I'm very sus of this graph because it's just from a dude's website. Who is Dr. Roy Spencer? And then data from, okay, in theory, that's like a paper. Craig Lowell, 2007 and 2008. Yeah, and you're right. He hasn't put in the last 30 years of data. I let's take a look. Let's try to find. I'm gonna try to pop up this website. drroyspencer.com. drroyspencer.com. And if it pops up, I will share it. Okay. Here we go. Yep. All right. I need to stop sharing this screen and start sharing another screen. Bam, share. Here we go. So here we go. Dr. Roy Spencer, PhD, climatologist, author, former NASA scientist. Cool. Global warming, natural or man-made? All right. So first and foremost, what is about? Let's go to our about section. PhD in meteorology. Oh my goodness. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, 1981. Principal research science at Alabama Huntsville. Senior scientist for climate studies at NASA. Okay. Cool. Cool. I think I've actually come across this guy before. Okay. So let's go to his homepage. Okay. I bet this is his data. I bet he made these graphs from. Okay. That's fine. That's data. Sorry, global warming. I'm trying to find okay, I'm trying to find that graph that he's using. This is lots. Okay. Science and religion, do your own damn Google search? What? Why is it that a Bible-believing scientist's views on science are automatically discounted by some people? I usually try to avoid the religion issue. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is possibly like a whole adventure. Let's go on global warming, natural or man-made. Okay. Well, the moral of this story, we'll go back. This might be another live stream of digging through this blog. I don't want to just bore you guys with it. I've got to stop and reshare. Oh, hey, thanks, Rebecca. Let me grab that, copy my link, and I'll pop it here. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so can you guys see that? Okay, perfect. Those who wrote the theory that mankind is responsible for global warming have been working for the last 20 years on a revisionist climate history, a history where climate was always in a harmonious state of balance until man came along and upset that balance. Like, that's not true. Like, that right there is that's a straw man. No, climate has changed a whole lot in our, yeah. I don't think anybody denies that, at least nobody in like modern stuff. Okay. And okay, he is verbose. Goodness. The above graph shows the average of 18 non-tree ring proxies of temperature from 12 locations around the Northern Hemisphere, published by Craig Lowell and later revised in 2008. Sure. Let me open link in new tab. Let me get that revised. So is this a paper? Supplemental information, correction to a 2000-year global temperature reconstruction based on non-tree ring proxies. Okay. I'm gonna guess that this is a legit paper. This seems, here's our proxies interpolated and smoothed. But by the way, this doesn't really look like this. You know what I mean? Okay. And this is just an explanation of the errors. Okay. So cool. Oh, I don't know what this anomaly is relative to. That's what I've been, is this relative to modern versions, right? And the other thing that I want to point out here is that this swings by less than 1 degree, right? But except for this little ice age, we get between minus 0.4 and plus 0.4, right? So we're swinging by less than a degree. And even when we're going down, it's like to negative 0.6. Over 2,000 years. Whereas we have warmed by a full degree, like within my lifetime. I think he just did that with a Sharpie, Rebecca. So that's really frustrating. So no scientist I know would deny that natural climate cycles exist. They certainly do. But the thing to see in this graph that our good friend is showing on screen in the video is that, okay, is the period, right? That's a very important thing, and how much it changes over that period. So, excuse me, do this button, nailed it, and then share screen, Chrome tab, share the audio. Oh, I'm getting so good at this. Okay. The thing to note here, again, is that the net swing, right, over this 2,000-year period is the same as the Earth's temperature has warmed in the last 40 years. 2000 and 40 are very, very different. So no one is really concerned about like slow climate change, right? Because, and so like climate change being natural, like funny story, all scientists know that, like all climate scientists are aware of that. So the current rate at which the Earth is warming cannot be attributed to natural climate cycles that we've observed in the past. So I guess there's that like 1 in a billion chance that like a magical new natural climate cycle just appeared for the first time ever, right? But like that's not the most reasonable conclusion. The most reasonable, and the fact that like the rise in temperature directly correlates with the rise in CO2 levels. We know humans emit CO2, right? And it's not that like, yes, the Earth has been warmer in the past and the Earth has had more carbon dioxide in its atmosphere in the past, but like also other life existed in the past, right? Like the Earth has changed a lot, and the rate is concerning because we're not giving animals, humans included, time to adjust, right? Ecosystems are changing so rapidly that like things just can't keep up, right? Okay, and I do not think he did. So an FFT team, that's a fast Fourier transform. It is, it's one of my favorite math tools. I'm using it. I'm doing a ton of them right now to look at sea ice trends. But what it tells you, like, hey, if we were to break this big squiggle into lots of little squiggles, what would those little squiggles look like? I don't think he did an FFT. Anyway. Okay. All right. Let's play. Let's keep going.
And what did we see back then? We have historical accounts that the temperature was low back then. As a matter of fact, the Vikings went from northern Europe over to Greenland. If we back up into the year 1000, and they were actually being able to farm in Greenland. And so 1,000 years ago, the Vikings were able to farm in Greenland. Can you farm in Greenland today?
1,000, much bigger than 40. Just gonna say it. I know it's like controversial opinion, but 1,000 and 40 are not the same thing.
Now, it'd be pretty tough. There's a lot of ice. Greenland is mostly ice covered. But then the Vikings went away, and then we see a lot of the historical evidence of the Little Ice Age. So back in Europe, the Thames River in London actually used to freeze over. And it did that. It did that in the Little Ice Age. So we have good historical evidence that the temperature was lower, particularly in Europe around the Little Ice Age. And of course, it's risen since then. We don't see those things. And we have historical evidence of the Vikings who went over to Greenland and farmed around the year 1000, but around the year 1200, they went back because Greenland was getting...
Okay, I would need you to provide evidence, like, he just made a claim that, like, Vikings went to Greenland and farmed, and then within 200 years, they were like, all this ice, we can't farm, guess we should leave. Like, that's making a really strong, like, cause and effect claim, and he hasn't showed any data to support it. So I would really need to see that. I know he's not an anthropologist, he's not a sociologist, he's not an ecologist, he's not a meteorologist, right? So I don't know where he's getting any of this information from. Anybody know? I don't know. I have no idea if we used to be able to farm, how farming was in Greenland 1,000 years ago. I don't know. Because that's not my field, you know? Gosh. Okay. I mean, like, Greenland currently has a permanent ice sheet. 1,000 years ago, it had a larger permanent ice sheet. So, I don't know.
Ice covered again.
No. The ice sheet that is currently on Greenland is left over from the last ice age, like 60,000 years ago. That didn't, like, go away and then come back. That's not what you get with a that's no. So he's just talking nonsense. He's just, like, talking right out of his ass now. Like, no. Aren't there like are there dairy farms there now? I don't know. There could be. I don't know Iceland's agriculture or Greenland's agricultural makeup. Okay. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna Google, like, are there dairy farms in Greenland? Let's Google it. Are there dairy farms in Greenland? Hey, there's currently dairy farming in Greenland. Is Greenland good for agriculture? And they have sheep farms. Cool. No, there's dairy farming going on there. Cool. So I'm glad to know that, Dave. I'm very glad to know that. I'm glad to know that our PhD chemist here can't bother to Google a claim before he puts it in a presentation. That's so upsetting. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Apparently he did think it disappeared. Okay.
And so we have data.
Whoa, what did I do? And so we have data.
See the PhD in organic chemistry from Harvard University. He has 18 published.
I can't do this again. I'm not doing this twice. Okay, let's go here. It's probably about as far as we were.
Try to fix it. And so you can see these two diametrically opposed perspectives on climate.
Oh, we got
so now
farther
let's
than
look
this.
at the data
Okay.
a little more. El Nino, if we back up into the year 1000.
Okay, he's going to start talking about Vikings.
And so global warming, you need to understand the greenhouse effect. You don't need to understand all the writings on this. I just want to show you this. But what is a greenhouse gas? It turns out that the sun generates energy. It sends the energy to the earth and warms the earth. And when the earth gets warm, what happens? Like all warm things, it releases radiation, infrared radiation. And that infrared radiation goes back up into the atmosphere. And a greenhouse gas actually absorbs some of that energy and reflects it back to the earth.
Okay, that is an accurate description of a greenhouse gas. Excellent.
And so I want you to think about a greenhouse gas like a blanket over you when you go to bed. What does a blanket do for you when you go to bed? It takes some of your body, your body's warm, it's generating infrared radiation.
All I can think of is like the Deep Space Nine episode of Trials and Tribulations, where they go back in time and do the like Tribble episode from the original series.
But your blanket holds some of that heat in and reflects it back into on your body and keeps you warm.
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy. That's a good way to describe what a greenhouse gas is and how they work to like a non-specialized audience. That's like, that's like that middle school-ish level of understanding. So I'll take it. I don't have a problem with that.
A greenhouse gas is just the same. And so CO2 will absorb some of that infrared radiation and reflect it back to the earth. And
I wouldn't say reflect. Re-emit is the more correct term there. I know that might sound nitpicky, but reflection and re-emission are two different nuclear reactions. And reflection implies that all of the energy goes back to the surface, whereas re-emission is the energy is emitted equally in all directions.
Keep us a little warmer than we otherwise would be. But the thing that scientists don't often tell you is if we didn't have all the greenhouse gases, the Earth would be about 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit cooler.
So it's true. And I don't know any scientist that wouldn't tell you that. It's in any Weather 101 class. The Earth would not be habitable by animals and creatures as we know it without greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases aren't inherently bad, but like most things aren't. Most things in nature can't be inherently bad, right? They're of nature. They have a neutral alignment. So like it's just you can have too much of a good thing. Yeah.
Than it is today. Now, would that be a problem?
Yeah.
That'd be a problem, wouldn't it? And so it turns out that we need the greenhouse gases to do that. And what is the major greenhouse gas? In the literature and the papers, they would tell you what? CO2, right?
No, of course it's not CO2. It's water vapor. Come on now. Again, that's not a secret. It's in every Weather 101. I talked about it in my Climate Dynamics YouTube series. There's not a conspiracy to hide this information from folks. Like, all you're doing is highlighting, like, unfortunately, the ignorance of your audience if they don't know what these things are. Gosh, okay.
CO2 is a major greenhouse gas, but that's not actually true. Water vapor and the clouds.
Okay, so why is this statement a little misleading, right? What I feel like he's being misleading is like, oh, well then if we want to affect climate, then shouldn't we like be much more concerned with the amount of water vapor? Well, the amount of water vapor in the air isn't changing like noticeably globally. The amount of water vapor in the air is in a pretty happy equilibrium, right? We've got the water cycle. Everybody learns about the water cycle. We understand how water like evaporates and goes up into the atmosphere and forms clouds, and then it rains. right? We've got a cycle. And also, water vapor has a much smaller residence time than CO2. So when you put water vapor into the air, it's going to no longer be in the air within a few days. Where again, CO2 lasts for a couple years. It's somewhere between 2 isn't enough, 5 is too many. It's somewhere in that range, but it's years. So I could, I don't know, buy every single humidifier on the planet, right? And pump water vapor into the air, and I couldn't affect global temperature because the natural processes that remove water vapor from the air would act to do so to get it back to its current kind of equilibrium state. The problem with CO2 is that it sticks around much longer, and it takes the natural processes that remove it take on the order of years, and we pump more into the air than can be removed. The process, CO2 isn't going to snow out of the air. It actually does that on Mars. It's very cool. But Mars's atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, right? Ours is less than 1. It's a thing. So like, so words are hard. So yes, so humans have the ability to affect the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. We don't really have the ability to affect the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. It's full stop, the end. I guess there are CO2 water vapor feedback loops. So by increasing CO2, we're increasing the amount of water vapor. That's a thing. That's a thing we can do. So we can affect it indirectly, but not directly.
Are actually a bigger effect in terms of the greenhouse gases than CO2 is.
Yes, but not in terms of, it is a bigger effect in like day to day, but not in terms of trend. Yes. More CO2 leads to more heat to accelerate more evaporation, which leads to more heat retention and so forth. Yes. And a secondary effect is that water vapor is also a greenhouse gas. Okay.
Yes. And they say, well, we can't do anything about water, so we're going to ignore it. But
no, that's not what anybody says.
I want to help you try to understand that the effect of water is actually greater than CO2.
For the average, not for the trend. For the average, not for the trend. These are different things. Different things, my guy.
CO2 effect, particularly from man-made CO2. And so roughly 85% of the greenhouse gas effect is actually water. And man-made CO2 is very low. But the scientists feel like that we can't do anything about water, and certainly water is with us to stay.
That's not what scientists think. That is not what they think. Water is not the problem.
But they concentrate on the CO2. But I want you to think about this for a minute. If CO2 were the issue, then why would it have been warm back in about 1000 AD?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. Different things can be true at the same time. No one is claiming that CO2 is the only way that global temperatures change, right? So that's what that question you just made, that's what that's dependent on, the idea that CO2 levels are the only thing that controls global temperature. That's absolutely not true. That still is not real. That's not real at all. Heckle and Jekyll. Yeah, cool. Post that link. I have to make you a mod, so let me do that real fast. Okay, there you go. I made you a mod. Don't abuse it. Thanks. But post that link. That would be cool. And I think that's, he didn't say barley, but I think that's like what he meant. Okay. Yeah, so CO2 CO2 levels certainly cause climate change, can drive climate change, but they're also not the only thing. Yeah, okay.
Was man generating a lot of CO2 back at that point?
Of course not. But look at the rate of change, much lower than it is today.
It doesn't seem likely to me, and I tried to make up this graph for you to help you understand.
Oh, this isn't true at all.
Back
this claim is wrong. Correlation between CO2 and global temperature is not only good in modern times. There's plenty of times in the distant past when it is very good. He also just said that he made this, so we're not going to take this seriously at all, right? This isn't a correlation. What? This isn't correlation. He didn't make a correlation plot. He just plotted curves with different y-axes, and like, look, they don't perfectly line up. That's not how you do a correlation, my guy. That's not how you do that at all. One, if you want to see if things correlate, you need to do a scatter plot, right? And then you do, again, a linear regression. I think Dr. White might not know how to do a linear regression. My guy, that's very basic math. You can do it in Excel. Oh, you did this in Excel. This is an Excel graph, isn't it? Oh no, honey. You can't, there's nothing wrong with Excel, but you cannot deal with this data sets, the size that meteorological data sets are in Excel. It's just like not gonna work because, one, oh my gosh, how many data points are he using? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He's using like one data point every 100 years or something. Oh my goodness. Right? Like when I was, I'm doing some research right now I'm looking at how well Arctic sea ice extent is represented in the new release of a global climate model, right? So I'm looking at daily data over 150 years. Yeah, Robert, I have no idea. I have no idea where, he doesn't cite his source for any of his data, so I don't know where he got his data from. 2, the data coverage here is insanely low. Again, it looks like it's like one value per 100 years. So that's not statistically, like that's not a statistically significant, like that's not a good sample size, right? Like you need a large enough sample size to be able to do reasonable statistics. And I'm not even saying you need like daily data if you're looking over 1,000 years, but like yearly data, that'd be great, right? Like what was the average temperature this year? You know? Oh my gosh. And again, this isn't he says this is a correlation. This isn't a correlation plot, right? These are just 2 line graphs on top of each other. That's not the same as correlation. Goodness, I really need to do a like how to do statistics course. I might do that after Weather 101. I'm thinking about that being like my next like lecture style set of videos of just basic stats.
For 1800,
no, I'm not letting you talk about this graph you made up with data you're not going to cite.
As others are.
No.
And the other reason is because of all the variability and the lack of prediction of temperature of the models that we do have so far. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to throw shade.
I talked about how to read this model last video, and I'm not going to go into that again because I'm just going to get mad. And I am bound and determined to finish this video. We only have like 16 minutes left, and I think he's probably going to go into sermon soon.
On the climatologists, they have a very difficult problem that they're trying to do, and we don't have enough data. And the trouble is, even if we have...
Yeah, my guy, it's a difficult problem, and it's a complicated one, and it is the height of arrogance for you to give a seminar like this as a non-specialist and say that we're all wrong. Okay.
Had enough data. Our computers right now are not big enough.
That's not the problem. The problem is the chaotic nature. Our computers are great
to predict the global climate situation.
No, that's not the problem.
The computing power is just not strong.
That's not the problem. Gosh, certainly better computing power has like improved forecast dramatically over the last like 20, 30 years, but we're getting to the limit of like faster computers won't necessarily make things better from this point forward. It depends on the problem, right? Like a better, stronger, more robust computer could certainly help like hurricane forecasts where you need to predict things on a time limit. Right, like I need to, but if I'm trying to predict what the Arctic sea ice is going to be like in 100 years, it does not matter if it takes my computer 6 months to run, right? Like that would be absurd. I don't want to wait 6 months. That seems boring. But like where faster computing speeds will help us are in things like hurricanes a coming, right? I need to get this high resolution forecast out in like 3 hours, right? But no, this his like I'm a kind old man blah 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 act is really getting me mad because he's being incredibly rude and just condescending to my whole field. Cool.
Long enough. And George Bach said it this way in a famous quote of his. He says, "All models are wrong, but some are useful."
Yeah. All models are wrong, some are useful. One, that was from 1979. Do you know what the state of computing was in 1979? Right? So what he means by that is like, well, if we were to take this statement, and I don't even disagree with that statement. I think it's kind of like a fun way to say things, right? But like a model could be as simple as like a simplified mathematical model, right? Like hydrostatic balance. Most climate models assume that the atmosphere is in hydrostatic balance. That's a terrible assumption if you're trying to predict weather, right? Hydrostatic balance means that like where an air parcel is like the pressure gradient force trying to pull it up is exactly balanced by gravity trying to pull it down. It very much simplifies vertical motion in the atmosphere. Which is great for climate models because over long timescales, hydrostatic balance isn't a bad assumption. But if you're thinking about like a tornado, right, then hydrostatic balance is a bad model because there's a ton of vertical motion going on, right? So you could say that, hey, a climate model is wrong because it's assuming the atmosphere is in hydrostatic balance. That's true, right? But that doesn't mean it's not useful, right? And it turns out if you're looking over the course of a year or 150 years, hydrostatic balance is a good approximation. It's just not good if you're looking on a time scale of like hours. So it's important to understand the ins and outs of every model that you're running. It's important to understand its limitations and where errors will come in, right? And that's why like running climate models is difficult. And I don't like that. So like maybe this is because he's a chemist where like, hey, I could go run an experiment. I can mix two chemicals. Bam, I did chemistry. I did an experiment. I understand chemistry experiments are not that simple. But my point is like, I can get more chemicals, right? We can't get another Earth. We have one planet. And so like, please explain to me what tool should I use other than a computer model to forecast climate change, right? Like it's all well and good to say, well, climate models are wrong. Okay, well, what's the better tool? You tell me, good sir, what's the better tool, right? Like, can you make a better one? If you can, excellent. Please join in on the science. Yeah. Okay. Also, this guy, George Box, was clearly not talking about computer models because this quote is from 1979.
Okay, and so that's true because anytime you're modeling something, your model is going to be not exactly like the thing that you're trying to model. I did this a lot when I was at Eastman Chemical working there. I tried to make models of our different processes. And when I didn't have enough data, my models were pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what we're seeing with the climatology.
No, it's not. It's not. You can't just make the claim that models are bad, right? Like all climate models are bad is what he just said. In what way? Do they have a warm or cold temperature bias? How did you determine that? Right? Are they messing up the strength of the jet? So the way that we do this, the way that we validate climate models is we first hindcast, right? So the first thing that we're going to try to do, so most climate models, like the data that I am analyzing right now, the year it starts is like 1850, and then it goes forward to 2100, right? So that's all long, and it's 100 ensemble members, but 40 are available to the public, I think. I could have that wrong. It's fine. So like the way that we validate it is we compare the model output to observations. That's why we go back all the way to 1850. Some of the stuff early on won't be right because you have to let parts of the model spin up. If you've ever run a model, like that should be a familiar term. But basically, think about the ocean, right? We've got big old ocean currents, and you've got to boy howdy, let those get going, right? So it takes, so the spinning up of a model, that's a kind of in the weeds thing, but it's a known thing we need to do. But then now we're going to have this data that's going from, we're basing it off historical records and things like that. And then we're able to compare the output of the model to actual observations to see how well did we capture things over this 10, 30, 50-year period. Okay, and now we're going into forecasting the future, right? So we validate forecasts, all numerical weather models, be they like weather or climate, by hindcasting. How well do we capture known events? That's how we validate it. Okay.
Just today, and certainly the models will get better as time goes on. So should we be panicked if the current temperature of the Earth is similar to what it was at that?
What do you mean by similar, right? Because in global average temperature, a degree is a big deal, right? Okay.
1,000 years ago. Should we be panicked if our mathematical models are?
You need to show me that that is true. That he has not demonstrated that mathematical models are biased towards predicting high temperatures. Demonstrate that to be true, good sir.
Biased toward predicting higher temperatures, which, as I showed you, they were.
No, you didn't. Okay. If CO2, you made not a correlation plot and are making that claim. Okay. Man generates a small percentage of the total CO2. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. The problem is the deviation from the mean. Okay. Okay.
The sun here for a minute. What is it? You've heard about the sunspots, right? And the 21 or 11-year cycle of the sun.
Yeah.
It turns out that is true, and we do see a very, very slight change in temperature over the cycle of the sun, and we see it there. But what has God designed? He's designed a star, the sun, if you will, that generates almost exactly to 99.9% the same amount of energy every day. The sun actually provides almost exactly.
Ooh, but fun fact, that hasn't always been true, right? So right now, our sun burns as bright as it is going to. It's bright and hot, right? Because we're at peak fuel consumption, but and the rate of fission is as much as it's ever going to be. And then that rate of fission will start to slow down, and then the sun will start to die. So 3 billion years ago, it was a little different, right? So time scale matters. So yes, today, over the life of humans, over absolutely, the sun is emitting about the same amount of energy. But if you look over the lifespan of a star, not so much. Okay.
Exactly the same amount of energy every day, and it just happens to give us the energy that we need.
Heckle and Jekyll, no. Not that I know of. They don't really vary willy-nilly. So, like, in general, the heat being produced by a star should be a function of what is fissioning at its core and the rate of fission. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, I think I misspoke earlier because when the sun goes into its like late phase, when it's fusing heavier and heavier elements, that like each fission will produce more energy. So it might get hotter for a bit. I'm not gonna try to remember my planetary science stuff off the top of my head. That's a terrible plan. Sorry, I have a hair in my mouth. Okay.
Need in terms of the light and the heat that we need. It doesn't burn us up, and it gives us light.
Doesn't burn us up. Tell that to my sunburned legs. Also, he's doing the like the puddle that thinks the hole was made just for it, right? That's not a good argument. No, we're not going to listen to some preaching. Not going to do that. Why aren't we freezing or burning up? We're in the Goldilocks zone. It's a thing. It's why life is here and not in other places on our planet. Okay, cool. Keep going. Keep going.
Think about this for a minute. Everybody says, well, the Earth is just exactly the right distance from the sun. Well, okay, let's think about the moon for a minute. How far?
The moon doesn't have an atmosphere, and it's because it's tidally locked. It has permanently shadowed craters, and its rotation rate is so slow, etc., so forth. It's a different body. Okay.
How far is it away from the sun? It's essentially the same distance as we are away from the sun, right? But what about the temperature on the moon?
So we have to.
The moon is 250 degrees Fahrenheit positive during the daytime, and roughly 250 degrees below zero at night. What do you think about that for a climate to live in? Not very good, right? We'd be in tough shape if we were trying to live there, that shape. And so greenhouse gases, tremendous difference in our climate and the difference between water. And I believe water is the key to the temperature stability of the Earth. The evaporation and condensation of the water helps move the heat from the sun around so that the temperature...
No. Like, we don't need water in our atmosphere to do that, right? Our atmosphere would be much calmer if there was no water in it. Now, granted, we probably wouldn't be alive. But that equilibrating the temperature, so our atmospheric motion is driven by the temperature difference between the equator and the pole. So this is like, water is the key to temperature stability? Absolutely not, right? Like, he's talking like several layers into thinking about how the weather works, and this is not the primary thing. So this just tells me that he really has absolutely no concept of just the basics of climate science or the basics of meteorology. So weather is fundamentally driven by global atmospheric circulation, which is driven by the temperature differential across latitudes. Okay. Yeah, Heckle and Jekyll. I don't think he's not good at this. Maybe he's a brilliant chemist. I don't know. Maybe he was a brilliant chemist, but he's not good at atmospheric science at all. Yeah, publisher, this will happen to you. Please, I would love to see him try to publish a paper that claims that like water is the most important thing for and specifically water in the atmosphere, right? Like, water in the oceans can be important for local temperature stability because of land sea differences in heating, but like, that's not greenhouse gas water vapor. Anyway, this is nonsense.
On the Earth is more or less the same. And the oceans, the Earth's surface has...
Okay, this is true. Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. Is a great heat sink and keeps the Earth's temperature from changing rapidly. So that's not strictly true. Temperature is gonna... maybe a little bit. It is true that like temperature swings in the southern hemisphere are a little less than they are in the northern hemisphere because the southern hemisphere has more ocean, right? Northern hemisphere has more land mass than the southern hemisphere does. But it's like it's not a huge thing, right? So certainly oceans help with this, but it's not like the first most important thing.
320 million cubic miles.
What is it with young Earth creationists being impressed by big numbers? Right? Like, is big. Okay.
Of water. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute.
Why?
I want you to think of a box
Why are we impressed?
that has a mile in each direction, okay? That holds about 1 trillion gallons of water.
That's not helpful, my guy.
20 million, but that's to change the temperature of that much water that fast. Matter of fact,
we don't need to change the temperature of the whole ocean, right? Just the surface. So that's a misnomer. So we're thinking about surface temperature is very different than deep ocean temperature. So I think he's getting into some weird places. So to increase the average temperature of the Earth, we do not have to warm the entire ocean. Absolutely not. We just need to warm the top like 10 meters. Yeah. Yep. And Boomer, you're absolutely right. Right, surface water temperature changes and the vapor pressure and evaporation rate on 2/3 of the surface of the planet once a day. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge variable in climate models. This is a thing we understand. He's not making some giant revelation. This would be this discussion. One, he's also getting a lot of it wrong. But the discussion of how water and ocean water mitigates temperature change, that is something that I talk about in like my weather and climate lab class for freshman non-meteorology majors, right? This is in any weather 101 class. It's not some big reveal.
In fact, water has that property. It's very difficult to change its temperature. And so that, to me, I believe, is also part of God's miraculous design. Water also is another important part for they just drop on the other figured out and in the design, right? This water cycle, and you know about it, it's the water from the oceans evaporates, goes up and forms clouds, and then the water comes down. And it goes into all these different places. But what's God done? He's got all this water that's not all that useful to us. What has he done? It evaporates and only the water goes up. The salt stays behind. And for all
we know how the water cycle works,
the water cycle. Another thing is carbon dioxide is critical to life. I want you to think about that for a minute.
Yep.
What on this?
No one is saying that all carbon dioxide is bad. No one is saying we should have absolutely no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is silly. Then we would have no plants. But doubling the amount of CO2 in the air in like 100 years, ooh, that's no good, right? Oh my gosh, no, I'm not. I don't care about your points that carbon dioxide is necessary for life, right? It's balance in all things, right? A human can die from drinking too much water, and humans will die if they don't drink water. It's about the balance, right? Right now, CO2 emissions are way out of balance with what the Earth can reasonably handle. So we have way more than we need for plants to live and thrive, right? If we had exactly what we needed for plants to live and thrive, then we wouldn't have like global warming. That wouldn't be happening. Okay. So I don't care to listen to him spew this straw man. Don't need to listen to him do it. Also, points for Mason Gleva in chat on the video we're reviewing for asking if the speaker is a climatologist or a meteorologist. Okay. Oop. Okay.
trace quantities, as I told you, 1 out of 2,500 molecules. Today, that's 400 parts per million.
400 parts per million, right? Like, how many parts per million of cyanide in your bloodstream does it need to kill you, right? Not much. Small amounts of things can have big impacts. We all know this.
Roughly. When we get down below about 180 parts per million, plants don't grow very well.
Okay, so let's not cut the total amount of CO2 in the air by more than half. Let's just stop emitting so much. Plants were just fine in pre-industrial levels, right? Pre-industrial revolution levels of CO2. Let's get back to that. That'd be great. That's all anybody's asking. Okay.
Also, and it doesn't really slow down. As you can see, it affects the rate of plant growth here, the amount of CO2 does in the atmosphere. And so who made the earth by his power? Out the heavens. And so let me skip that. Let me go on to this real quickly.
Ooh, so Rebecca, in my mind, the best way to do it is to try to remove CO2 from the oceans, because the oceans are super, super good at absorbing CO2, right? This would be really, really cool. I have no idea if we could actually do it. But you know, if you ever go to like any type of fancy building and they have that stone that's like green, like different colors of green with white strips through it, that stone. We need to figure out how to artificially make that type of stone, because that white stuff that's inside of it, that is calcium carbonate, I think, but that's like that type of stone forms when ocean water gets like mixed down into the mantle, and then all of the carbon that's in that ocean water gets pulled into this rock, into those white strips that you see. Anywho, that would be a very cool way. We need to figure out, one, cutting emissions. That sounds great. Two, if we can pull some out of the ocean, then the ocean will do its ocean thing and absorb CO2. Yeah. Okay. But first step is to just emit less. So really, if we can emit less, then like eventually natural processes will remove it, right? The problem is right now our emissions overwhelm those natural removal processes. So we either need to emit less or figure out how to artificially remove more, or both. Pump seawater into volcanoes. I love it. Let's try it. Also, oh, hi, Anne. Yeah, I've got stamina tonight because I don't want there to be a part 3 to this. But I'm glad you could join. Okay.
And then I'll end up, and I'll have to do this quickly. Biblical history, I contend, better explains the ice just happened. If the earth gets colder, you do form some ice, but there isn't very much water in the air when the temperature gets colder.
Really? You want to prove that? I'm waiting.
You ever thought about that? On really crisp winter days, is there much water in the air?
Oh my gosh, my guy, that has to do with relative humidity. But like, if the global average temperature drops by like 4 degrees, the tropics are still going to be real warm. We still are going to have a large global difference. Okay.
Well, no, the humidity's like very low. And so
warm air can hold more water vapor than cold air. That is true. Okay.
Well, so where's all the snow going to come from that generates the ice for an ice age? And so,
oh my goodness, does he think there's not precipitation in the Arctic? Because also, dude, like it can hold less, so it rains quicker. Oh my gosh. Snow falls in the Arctic all day long. Absolutely, Robert. Yeah, do you think we don't get precip? Oh my goodness.
So it turns out what you really need is you really need a warm ocean and a cold continent.
No.
Well, how in the world would you have gotten that?
No.
And I don't have time to explain it all.
Also, a temperature difference can matter, but you'll get that over the course of a day, right? Like, guys. Oh no! Does he think water only evaporates? How does he think evaporation works? Because clearly water evaporates when we're not at like the boiling point, right? It's never 212 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And yet water evaporates. Oh my gosh, how does that happen? Pressure, saturation, vapor pressure, team. Oh my goodness. He doesn't understand any of this. And this part he should. Like, this is atmospheric chemistry. This is chemistry. This is oh no. Oh honey.
All today, but let's look at this for a minute. Let's look at here and at the arc. And it looks like from the scientific evidence that lava at the bottoms of the ocean, that those ocean floors spread open and that lava contacts the air. It's even through the deep when you see that in the biblical account. But what would that also do? It's going to raise the temperature of the oceans, right? So it would make a warmer ocean and the earth move.
No, he's trying to explain Noah's flood and how it rains for 40 days straight. I'm not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is not a Noah's flood stream.
All over the earth and roughly midway between the continents.
Nope. We're not doing it. We're done. We're done with this. We're not talking. I am done. I'm not talking about Noah. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that tonight. Listen, I've been going for 2 hours. This is a long live stream. I ran out of water like an hour ago and I'm dying a little bit inside. Well, I'm dying inside because of what he's saying, but then I'm also really thirsty. These are two. Yeah, both are true. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. Hi, team. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for everybody that hung out this whole time with me. You guys are really cool. I super appreciate you. If you want to like support the stream, something right now that would be super helpful is I'm still short on view. I can't be monetized because I'm short on view hours, right? I would love for my channel to pay for itself. That's a goal. That's a goal. And I have things in mind that I want to do when I can like have some money to throw at the channel that's not like from my PhD student stipend, right? So ways you can help me out. One, I've got a buy me a coffee link. If you are willing and able to support me financially, that'd be super cool. Two, I've made if you haven't watched my past live streams, what I need are view hours to get to monetization. So I made a playlist of like old live streams. So if you're bored, just click play and let it play and it'll give me the hours. And that would actually be super, super helpful. And I would deeply appreciate it. Thank you all so much for hanging out this whole time. You are lovely people. So schedule, I'll have a scripted video released tomorrow. It's on the dry adiabatic lapse rate. Sunday's video is moist adiabatic lapse rate. So those are my 2 scripted videos coming. And then I think next thing in the works is just I'll be back at live streaming this time next week. And look out for that poll to see if there's interest in going through the IPCC report, the latest version that was just released. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go get a drink. Have a great night, team, and I will see you guys next week. Okay.